So, if you've ever been alive, like ever, just alive, you have probably heard of a little underground series I like to call Lord of the Rings. For those that don't know, Lord of the Rings originated as a book series released in the 1950s, written by a man named J.R.R. Tolkien. And yes, it is pronounced Tolkien, not Tolkien. Split into 3 parts, The Fellowship of the Ring, The Two Towers, and The Return of the King, respectively, these books later went on to become one of the most influential and well-made film trilogies of all time. Now, Tolkien and his fantasy writing pretty much single-handedly influenced and shaped all modern fantasy tropes and worlds, and we could spend a lot of time going down the fascinating rabbit hole of how influential and iconic both his writing and the subsequent films came to be, but today I want to turn our eyes to something a little bit more overlooked: Tolkien's portrayal of masculinity and intimacy between men. Now, this may come as a surprise, but I, at 23 years old, have just watched the Lord of the Rings trilogy for the first time. Now, as someone who went in blind to this series, I started with the Hobbit book, watched the subsequent films, which I don't want to talk about, and then moved on to the main Lord of the Rings trilogy books. I made it through the entire series pretty much blind to anything about the films or story in general, and really feel lucky to have been able to experience both the books and the films for the first time in the way I did. How did I go my entire 23 years of living without knowing barely anything about the series? I don't know, maybe my parents have poor taste and I'm wishing they didn't so I could have started wearing Clinique Black Honey at a much younger age. Oh, if you know, you know. Now, I had an absolutely lovely time living in Tolkien's world and was truly sucked into the books before recently getting sucked into the films as well. Now, I could do a whole video about my thoughts and how it felt watching the films for the first time after reading the books, but to pinpoint one thing that truly stood out to me in the series as a whole is how the main characters interacted with not only other men, but the world and emotional plane around them. Now, it's no secret that these are not the books to read if you are looking for extensive female representation, but I was pleasantly surprised that despite the story being filled with male characters, I never felt left out. I always saw myself in the male characters in the story and never once even minded that there were barely any female characters to see myself in. Better yet, in a book filled with epic battles, war, and survival that are traditionally seen as male subjects, and to be honest, I'm usually not that interested in, I was completely engaged and connected to everything going on. There are a couple of reasons that I feel this ended up being my, and probably many others' experience. Talking in terms of societal gender roles, this story actually gives off a very feminine energy despite being written by a man about men. Despite the odds of the content, it never felt like I was a woman intruding into a man's world. Tolkien writes in a way that, though inherently gendered, pulling from his own experiences, feels genderless due to his breakdown of characters to the very basis of the beauty that makes us human. The events and relationships that take place in this world almost feel translated through the lens of an androgynous or female gaze, if one exists. I'm not sure how else to explain it. This is refreshingly beautiful, as it seems even things like war and violence are being told through a lens of tragedy, necessity, and maintaining hope, instead of fulfilling ego, dominance, and power. The epic battles seem less about the action and more about the camaraderie and fellowship between man, and how despite hardship driving different people to both hope or despair, it mainly draws us together as people. The world and characters in it seem gentle and loving, despite some being typically strong male warriors. The speeches from the protagonists are never about coming down hard on the enemy from a place of violence in their heart. They are always about uniting in hope and fighting for love, friendship, peace, and mercy for all. Mercy and empathy specifically are themes that I find very refreshing and beautiful in this series. Even the strongest of the male characters always fight for mercy and understanding of their enemy. For example, Gandalf urging Frodo to reconsider passing judgment and wishing death on those that might at first seem evil, sending him on his path of better empathizing with Gollum. You can also see examples of this empathy through the language that Tolkien uses when having a character describe the enemy or war in general. I think this is well realized in the scene of Faramir from the films.
The enemy. His sense of duty was no less than yours, I deem. You wonder what his name is, where he came from, if he was really evil at heart. what lies or threats led him on this long march from home. He would not rather have stayed there. In peace.
Is there violence and death and war? Absolutely. But it's clear that it's not from a place of romanticization or glorification. This, of course, is a direct result of war being interpreted through the eyes of someone who has experienced it firsthand. Now, for those that don't know, Tolkien fought in World War I in the Battle of the Somme from July to November 1916. While his talent and fascination in language and linguistics might have been responsible for what started him on his journey of storytelling, the war is assumed to have inspired his writing in a much different way. After you have gone through war and witnessed countless atrocities, watched men's lives be treated as currency, and lost all of your friends in the blink of an eye, you have to come back different. I can only assume that a man would realize how important it is to put aside social expectations and be present and intimate with one another. For life is fleeting, and it's important that those that matter know they are valued. That got deep. Let's talk bromance. Let's take a look at the pairing of Legolas and Gimli, the perfect bromance. These are both characters that come from completely different lands and cultures, both of which they are very proud of. Their peoples also carry prejudice for one another. Now, usually amongst people, this can lead to issues with ego that leaves one stubborn and stagnant. A lot of traits traditionally thought to make up toxic masculinity start from a place of feeling insecure and threatened, both of which Gimli and Legolas could have easily felt. But instead, we see their relationship, and to some extent rivalry, bud into a beautiful friendship where they seek to better understand each other and their backgrounds. They use their rivalry to push each other to greatness and better expand their understandings of the world, instead of further pushing each other into insecurity and prejudice. In a toxic world, their separate strengths could be threatening to one another, but instead, they learn and grow together while celebrating what the other brings to the table. Now, this is obviously an arc that doesn't happen right away. While Legolas is rather docile from the beginning, Gimli does to some extent start out from an aggressive and stubborn place. He initially is very adamant about wanting nothing to do with the elves and is constantly looking to prove himself and the dwarves as above them. Now, this is probably a rather normal reaction for someone who has grown up being fed negative information about a different race. However, what I love about them is that as soon as they see the goodness in each other, they follow that path of understanding instead of going further down the one of hate. One of my favorite moments for Gimli is when he goes into Lothlorien hesitant to trust and respect the elves, but comes out the other side in awe of Galadriel, the Lady of Light. Not only is she a powerful woman, but she is also a member of a race he was taught to hate. Yet instead of feeling threatened by her, he puts aside what he once knew and becomes vulnerable in respect and awe for her power and beauty. Now, I do want to touch on the fact that Gimli's character is slightly different in the films than the books, which is honestly one of my small quarrels with the trilogy. In the films, Gimli's character definitely leans into the stubborn, egotistical competitiveness for comedic relief. He's much more fragile in the films, and it is a bit annoying considering I think it waters him and his arc down a little bit, but overall the main message of friendship between him and Legolas can still be seen. Do they compete and challenge each other throughout the story? Absolutely, but it's all in good fun, and though they may act like it, they are never truly threatened by each other's strength and success. Just one example of how love and friendship are valued over all in these stories. Now, if you thought one bromance wasn't enough, it's time to look at the most significant of them all: Frodo and Sam. Now, I again want to touch on the fact that while still done incredibly well in the films, the relationship of these two is even more moving and beautiful in the books. That, of course, is mainly because the book is not limited on time and allows you to see even more mundane moments of them together. I mean, Frodo and Sam's story moved me so much while reading the books for the first time, especially when they get to the darker and more desperate moments of surviving Mordor. The love and loyalty that these two hobbits show to each other is absolutely beautiful, and is in my eyes the gold standard of how we should treat those that we truly love. Now, they obviously go through an extremely traumatic time together, and of course that is going to bring people together in a very intimate way, but even before the story gets darker, they are still showing devotion and care for each other in a very uplifting way. especially Sam. Sam is such a kind, loving, and loyal friend. He has no issue being vulnerable and soft with those he cares about, and he makes it clear that he would do anything for them. I'm not kidding when I say that one of the times I cried while reading the books was when Sam had to say a tearful goodbye to Bill the horse, an animal that he had built such love for and was unashamed of it. I also love that although he gets emotional during this part, his friends don't judge him for his vulnerability, but empathize with him and attempt to bring him comfort and strength to go on. Now, once the story gets significantly darker and Sam and Frodo pass into Mordor, their relationship is really put to the test. I mean, they are truly desperate to survive while fighting the elements, hunger, and exhaustion, and this leads them to some very intimate moments. Now, there are the more obvious aspects of their friendship put on display, like their empathy and selflessness towards one another as they try to best take care of each other's needs for survival, their general support for each other when things get hard, and their bravery when protecting one another from harm. Okay, let's be honest, Sam does the bulk of the work here, but Frodo is going through some shit, so we're just gonna give him a pass. But I want to look at the moments of true intimacy shared between these two when they have a moment of rest between danger to tend to one another. While it's toned down in the films, things get significantly affectionate in the books. Now, Sam pronounces that he loves Frodo multiple times throughout the books, and his absolute devotion for him can be seen pretty much everywhere, but possibly the most significantly affectionate moment they share is within the books when they are reunited in the Tower of Cirith Ungol, and Sam holds a naked, wounded Frodo to his chest. Frodo lay back in Sam's gentle arms, closing his eyes, like a child at rest when night fears are driven away by some loved voice or hand. Sam felt that he could lay like that in endless happiness, but it was not allowed. He kissed Frodo's forehead. Now, when reading a moment like this, it's no secret why people believe this story to be queer-coded. In parts, these two share an intimacy that almost seems equivalent to romance, but I want to challenge that. Now, given Tolkien's background of devout Catholicism, along with the time period he grew up in, it would make sense to hide a queer relationship in plain sight. After all, being openly queer could be practically a death sentence in those times of intolerance. So the idea that Sam and Frodo could have romantic feelings for each other that Tolkien could not openly admit does check out. But I want to ask the question, what if they were straight? Why does intimacy and love for one another amongst men immediately get labeled as homosexual? What if this is what a healthy, loving relationship should look like? Perhaps this is just the result of a man who had seen the tragedies of war, lost his closest friends, and realized what a waste of time it was to hold back the true love you have for those around you. I don't know, both scenarios work in my book, but I just think there is something to be said on our cultural expectations of what friendship should look like amongst men, and how intimacy between men can't be seen as anything other than homosexual. What if Sam and Frodo were just friends that kiss? Gay. Oh man, Aragorn. The ultimate man, my ultimate fictional crush. And everyone's, let's be honest. Now, on a serious note, Aragorn is the manifestation of everything women and men could want masculinity to be. He is truly a character for all. He is the ultimate strong male hero, a warrior, a king. Aragorn quite literally checks all of the boxes on the checklist of what makes a traditionally masculine man. He's strong, a great soldier, women want him, and he finds himself in a position of great leadership and power. He never loses a fight, he always practices bravery, and when he sets out on a task, he never fails. The other men look up to him and are willing to follow his lead wherever he may go. He has it all, everything a traditional man could want to be, but he's different. He uses his strength and power to inspire and protect, not boast. In the books, there is a big emphasis on him being a healer and how the hands of a king are the hands of a healer, further emphasizing the significance of nurturing traits among powerful men within this world. Women fall for him, but he doesn't womanize. He respects and empathizes with them and their feelings. When Éowyn reveals her feelings towards him, he handles them with care. granted more so in the books than the movies, and he never minimizes her feelings towards him or wanting to join the war effort. He is kind and protective of her and handles her confessions gently while also taking them seriously. He's a selfless lover who attempts to completely ignore his wants and needs in order to secure the best future for his partner, no matter how heartbreaking the reality for himself. Above all, he is a fierce friend who protects and inspires those around him. He laughs, he cries, he loves. He doesn't hide from his insecurity, but works through it for the greater good of others. You either want to be him or be with him, and he is honestly one of the most androgynously appealing characters that I've ever seen in media. He truly appeals to everyone. I think this is important because he shows that masculinity can exist in a way that removes all of the harm towards oneself and others. He is that strong masculine hero while also being in touch with his emotions and allowing himself to feel them. His masculinity is not threatened by shedding tears for his friends or being led by heart and empathy. He's a perfect example of what I wish today's conversation on masculinity would evolve into. Not a conversation on how to eradicate it or further advance it, but a conversation on how it can serve both women, men, and anyone in between. And really, that's the point I'm trying to make here. In recent years, there have been a lot of conversations around both masculinity and femininity in the traditional sense, and whether or not they should be demonized or praised. I feel like this is passing over the solution though. Both masculinity and femininity are beautiful things that can exist in a way that serve all without negatively contributing to upholding systems like the patriarchy and patterns of abuse passed down through generations. And that's the source of one of the reasons I find these stories so special. They pose the questions that I believe we should all be asking. What if we as people served each other, served friendship, served the greater good, served empathy and love? What if expectations of intimacy and honesty about one's emotions were expected from all genders? What if serving our masculinity and femininity actually helped us serve others and ourselves? Our existences should be gentle and gracious when able, and our harsher moments should serve the greater good. So maybe Sam and Frodo were lovers, or maybe they weren't. Maybe they are an idealized example of a world where men can break down barriers and deeply love their friends.